First of all, let me show you the Pro Football Magazine, the Preview and Fantasy Football Guide, Phil Steele's 2012 edition. So check that baby out as well. PhilSteele.com. That's that magical website. Phil, let's jump right into the pros and save the Browns game tonight for last. First game I want to talk about is Denver at home against Oakland. Now, obviously, Oakland with a sweet, sweet win over Pittsburgh last week. And, of course, Denver, they're coming off a loss to Houston.
Yeah, Denver actually comes into this one 1-2, but I think when you look at Denver's opponents this year so far, you have to be impressed. They took on Pittsburgh, Atlanta, which may be one of the best teams in the NFC, and then the Houston Texans, which might just be the best team in football this year. So having 2 losses against that schedule is not too bad. Now they take a big step down in level of competition. And last week, Oakland had the benefit of being out on the West Coast, being an underdog, coming into the game 0-2. Maybe they didn't catch Pittsburgh's A game, and as it was, Pittsburgh led by 10 points in the fourth quarter. Oakland pulls out the victory at the very end. They only had 321 yards offense in the game. I think when you look at the matchups, big edge on offense goes to Denver. Home edge goes to Denver. And then with Denver having New England and San Diego on the road in upcoming games, I think they want to avoid a possible 2-4 or 1-5 start to the season. So it's a conference game. Denver is, in my mind, an upper third team in the NFL. Oakland, one of the bottom 5 teams in the NFL. I like Denver to win this one at home convincingly.
Jacksonville got on the board with a victory last week as they knocked off the Indianapolis team with young Andrew Luck. Cincinnati, of course, is on a roll. They're a road team. They're a very, very slight favorite in this one following their victory against the other rookie quarterback. It's getting a lot of ink in the early going, and, of course, that's Griffin III.
Yeah, you know, you look at Blaine Gabbert, what poor stats he has unless he's throwing a Hail Mary pass late in the game. He was just 9 of 20 last week with about 70 yards of offense, and then he hits a big 80-yard pass to win the game for Indianapolis. And in the first week of the season, when they played the Minnesota Vikings, last play of regulation, he goes and hits a 60-yard pass. But Gabbert on the season just hitting 50%, although he has greatly improved one area, and that's his decision-making. He's got 4 touchdowns and is yet to throw an interception. But the thing I'm most impressed with Jacksonville is I remember when Maurice Jones-Drew was holding out, and you just assumed that, well, remember what happened to Chris Johnson last year. He held out and was very ineffective throughout the course of the year. Well, Maurice Jones-Drew didn't have a big first game of the season, did better in the second, but how about 177 yards on 28 carries last week against the Indianapolis Colts? It looks like he's back, and defensively, you got to give the edge to Jacksonville as well. Now, Cincinnati surprised me last week by going into Washington, coming out with the win. In fact, they had a 478 to 381-yard edge. They do have weapons on offense, but with Jacksonville at home, with MJD now starting to get the football and become effective, I'm going to side with Jacksonville to pull this one out at home in a close one.
All right, Phil, before we ask for your opinion on the matchup between Green Bay at home against New Orleans, can you imagine if this lockout had not been resolved and the replacement officials would have walked onto the field in Lambeau after what happened? First of all, there's a lot of factors involved in why this got resolved so quickly. I find it fascinating that it was so complex and we're far apart, and then we have this fiasco the other night, and on the very next day they resolve all these differences.
Yeah, and I came off of the Sunday night game as well, which I thought was poorly officiated. A lot of defensive penalties got called in that game, which really attributed to the higher score of that particular matchup. But, yeah, I agree 100%, Bruce. If the replacement officials came into Green Bay, look out, because they got robbed. And it was not only the Hail Mary pass on the final play, but you could go to the drive prior to that where there was a offensive pass interference rule, defensive pass interference. An interception was overturned for a roughing the quarterback, and he was simply making the tackle on the quarterback as he threw the football. Very poorly officiated game, and the Green Bay Packers start the season 1-2 because of it. And I think it probably makes them a little more desperate here.
And, you know, the other thing, we heard the kind of money in Las Vegas. One casino wasn't even, they were honoring the fans, the other way. I mean, that's that's unheard of. I can't ever recall that happening, and returning the money, and let alone online. But you know what hasn't been estimated The majority of money that's wagered on professional football in this country, Phil, is with illegal bookmakers. There's no way of telling how much money was at stake one way or the other in that fiasco the other night with them.
Yeah, that and offshore books. In fact, I've heard estimates. The low-end estimate is probably $350 million, and the high-end estimate is $1 billion. Changed hands on that one play of the game, which in my mind was an obvious interception. If a guy's got the ball pinned to his chest and somebody sticks his arm around his body and touches the ball, how is that simultaneous possession? I think it completely goes against the rule of it. So it's a tough loss for Green Bay fans. And as you mentioned, one casino did give the money back to the Green Bay Packer fans. The only other time I heard of it, and somebody in the office mentioned it to me today because I don't really follow other sports, there was a boxing match last year where a casino in Vegas did the same thing because it was obvious that it was a wrong decision in a boxing match, a well-known boxing match last year.
Would you agree the referees won in this dispute?
Yeah, and it was probably because of that Monday night game. And I think had that play not happened and had Sunday night not happened, I think the NFL would have held out and the referees would have broke very soon.
All right, let's get to the specifics of Green Bay hosting New Orleans. Boy, does Peyton's absence mean that much to this? They were a great team last year. They could have easily gone to the Super Bowl last year. They just don't look anything like they did. I saw the ending of their game last week. My goodness, it was sad the way they lost that game. And, of course, Green Bay has got this anger in them. They're going to be in an unbelievable mood.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100% there. And you look at New Orleans, not only is Peyton's leadership not lacking, but also his play calling. Last year, there was a game where Peyton injured his knee in the second quarter of a game, and their offense was clueless with him off the sideline. And the next week, he sat on the sidelines and only called maybe a few plays in the game. Someone else called them. And once again, the Saints' offense was lethargic. With Peyton calling the plays, they're a completely different team. And last week against Kansas City Chiefs, while they led the game by 18 points, they only had 288 yards offense for the game against that Chiefs defense. That's hard to believe. This is a Saints team that not only has an interim head coach, but for the first 6 games of the season are going with an interim head coach to an interim head coach, which I've never heard of in the history of sports. So they are struggling. And look at the teams they've lost to: Washington, Carolina, Kansas City. Do you realize that those 3 teams have not beaten any other NFL team except for the New Orleans Saints? It sort of tells you about how strong their opponents are. And with Green Bay, they lost in the opener to San Francisco. They plastered Chicago on a Thursday night, and they beat Seattle on Monday night, except for that play call. I think they take their anger out here. I'm looking for a Green Bay team, much like the one that showed up against Chicago. Look, and remember, they've had some close games against New Orleans in years past, so they'll be well prepared. I like the Packers to win this one going away. This next one, I'm very anxious to hear your opinion on. This is a great rivalry. It's a great matchup. It actually was the game, with what Chino did with the kneel down formation that was controversial a couple of weeks ago. It was because of a Giants Philadelphia game many years ago that formation came into existence, as you know, Phil. Joe Pisarcik. Yeah, right. Philadelphia, they're both 2-1. The defending Super Bowl champs against a team that was supposedly the dream team last year, but very easily could represent the NFC this year in the Super Bowl. Yeah, and for you younger watchers or tuner-inners out there, it was Joe Pisarcik for the Giants. They had the game wrapped up against the Eagles. He turned around and handed off, and the ball popped loose. And none other than Herm Edwards picked up the ball and raced for a touchdown for the Philadelphia Eagles. And that is what really started the whole kneel-down thing in the NFL. So great point of reference there, Bruce. I think when you look at this matchup, it is tough to call because Philadelphia's got the talent. You look at what they're doing this year. They're outgaining teams by 141 yards per game, 417 yards offense, only 276 yards allowed on defense. But Michael Vick's the problem. This guy is a turnover machine. They're already -6 in turnovers this year, and if given the opportunity, he'll turn over. Look at Arizona last week. It's 17-0. They're down. They still have a chance to climb back in the game. They're at the Arizona 2-yard line. He gets sacked, fumbled. It's picked up and returned for a touchdown. Now they're down 24-0 at the half, and they really have no chance of winning. With the Giants, what an effort they had against Carolina. They showed a C-game effort against Tampa Bay, A-game effort against Carolina, came out with the win. It seems like they just pull no-name wide receivers have big games for them when they play. Andre Brown looked good. Eli Manning looked good. The Giants have the character of a defending Super Bowl champion. Philadelphia has all the talent in the world, but they continue to underachieve. I find this one very difficult to pick one of the two teams because I can make a case for or against Philadelphia based on if Michael Vick turns the ball over or not.
Dallas is at home Monday night against the Chicago Bears. They're slightly more than a field goal advantage here.
Now, this one, I clearly like Dallas. You look at how they performed this year. They went into the New York Giants. I thought had a very solid performance. They outgained the Giants 433 to 269, won that game on the road. The next week against Seattle, they're playing in front of that loud atmosphere, and they have 2 turnovers on special teams, give Seattle 14 cheap points, and they end up losing by 20. Last week against Tampa Bay, they only allowed 166 yards. They led that game by 9, gave up a field goal late, which I imagine a lot of Dallas backers in that game weren't too happy about. Now, on the other side of the coin, the Chicago Bears, they look great against 2 of the weakest teams in the NFL, Indianapolis and St. Louis, both at home. Their defense dominated, their offense dominated, they had big wins. But in their one matchup of the year which mattered, they only gained 168 yards at Green Bay. Dallas's defense is just as good, maybe even better than Green Bay's defense. I think they limit the Bears to about 200 yards offense in the game. Dallas not going to overwhelm you because the Bears have a good D and Dallas's offense been struggling a little bit. But I like the Cowboys to win this one, something by 7 to 10 points in this game. And I look for a lower scoring game for the Bears because I question their offensive output against a good defense on the road.
All right, let's get to the Browns tonight against Baltimore. I mean, we had, I think, a little momentum, Phil, going into this game against Buffalo. I predicted an outright win. You predicted an outright win. But it was so demoralizing. Here's the other point I want to make before I turn it over to you. The Browns should have won the first game of the season against Philadelphia, could have won the second game against Cincinnati, and should have won the game against Buffalo. You know, the only thing that's been missing in this 0-3 record is a blowout, and that's what I'm afraid of tonight.
Yeah, it's very possible. And, you know, when you look at last week's game against Buffalo, it was almost a backs-to-the-wall game. If the Browns are going to do anything this season, you need to beat one of the weaker teams on your schedule at home. And I thought the situation greatly favored them as they were catching Buffalo off a big win over Kansas City and traveling. I was not impressed with the first quarter of the game. Once C.J. Spiller went out, I thought the Browns played okay, but a very disappointing performance. And yeah, as you said, Bruce, I called for the Browns to win outright last week, and I was regretting that at the end of the game. Now, Baltimore's offense been flying, and here's the difference. Baltimore in years past relied on the defense, special teams, and the offense not to make mistakes. This year, they've thrown that out the door. They've said, we're going to go and run as many plays as we can on offense in each game. They like to run that hurry-up offense. Now, their defense is a lot more susceptible. They're giving up 401 yards per game on the season, and, you know, they lost their star linebacker for the season to injury. Ray Lewis is maybe another year longer in the tooth. Their whole defense got a little longer in the tooth. I don't think they have one of the elite defenses in the NFL, but they do have a high-flying offense. Joe Flacco has had the Cleveland Browns numbers. I expect tonight's game to be a high-scoring game. I think that's probably your best bet in this situation, is that a lot of points are going to be on the board, but I don't see the Browns being that competitive in it. Like you, Bruce, I do fear the possibility that this could be one of those games where Browns fans shut it off in the third quarter. But if they play like they did in the first 2 games, you never know.
So you do think that Whedon can move the ball, though?
I do think so. This Baltimore defense is not the Baltimore defense that people think of when they think of Baltimore, because they've had such a top 5 defense for all these years. I don't think if Baltimore's defense will land in the top 10, maybe not the top 15 this year, especially with their offense trying to get as many plays run per game as possible.
Richardson was shut down in games 1 and last week against Buffalo, had a phenomenal game in week 2 against Cincinnati. Will he have some success?
I look for him to probably top 100 yards in this game. I think Baltimore might key on him a little bit, trying to get Whedon to throw the football. But Trent Richardson is just one of those running backs where, you know, he's, I think, a special running back coming to the NFL. And against this Baltimore defense, which I think is overrated, I do think Richardson will have success tonight.
You're the best. Pro Football Magazine, Phil Steele, 2012 edition. Here's the college preview, the book that the experts cannot do without. And, of course, PhilSteele.com, that magical website. I'm already looking forward to having you on the show next week, partner.
All right, Bruce, you have a great weekend, my friend.
Thank you very much. Phil Steele, the one and only.